I have to talk about this story because this book came out, and obviously we just got to cover it. It was breaking while we were on the air. We just got to cover it at the very last minute. But it's based around the publication, promo release of some excerpts of this book by Michael Wolff, called The Fire and the Fury. What's it called? The Fire and the Fury, inside the Trump White House. That's what it is. And the thing is, I read the excerpt, I read an interview the guy gave, and the book is garbage. I mean, I haven't read the whole book, so maybe there's wonderful, wonderful stuff buried in there. But I can't believe the way the media reacted to this thing. Now, the one thing we have to say is, listen, I love politics, and I'm a novelist, and politics is like a big novel being just playing out in front of you. You never know what's going to happen next. It's got all these surprises, got all these characters, all these big personalities and all this. And this is a great political story. This Steve Bannon thing is a great political story because he was at the center of the mails from yesterday, and I'll get back to that. But you shouldn't confuse it with an important story. It's fun. If you don't enjoy politics, you shouldn't follow politics. I said to a friend of mine over the break, I said, anybody who loses a friend over American politics doesn't know anything about American politics, because most of American politics is just going back and forth and getting utterly hysterical over absolutely nothing. And this is one of those stories. It really doesn't matter what happens to Steve Bannon next. But it is fascinating and it's worth looking at. But what does matter is the way the media treats it, because they are selling a narrative. And when I go back to New York, I can tell you every single one of my left-wing relatives and friends is going to think that this story is the absolute truth. And I'm going to show you how easy it is to debunk this thing. So Michael Wolff, famously, John Podhoretz writes about this a little bit. He just had a column as I was driving into work. He said, what did he say about Wolff? That Wolff has a lifelong habit of weaving solid reporting with errant speculation. Well, listen to some of this stuff, okay? The big one, of course, from the book is Bannon's take on the June 2016 meeting involving Trump's son, Donald Jr., son-in-law Jared Kushner, who was then the campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, and the Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya. We all remember this. They were shouting treason. Every mainstream media guy was shouting treason. And apparently it was this kind of nothing meeting. They probably shouldn't have had it, but nothing really came of it. So Bannon says, and this is the big quote, the three senior guys in the campaign thought it was a good idea to meet with a foreign government inside Trump Tower in the conference room on the 25th floor with no lawyers, even if you thought that this was not treasonous or unpatriotic or bad blank. And I happen to think it's all of that. So it was treasonous, unpatriotic. You should have called the FBI immediately. The chance that Don Jr. did not walk these Jumos up to his father's office on the 26th floor is zero, okay? Now, let's think about this. Bannon joined the Trump campaign in August. So that's 2 months later, right? 2.5 months later. He wasn't at this meeting. He wasn't in the campaign. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, his knowledge is the same as mine or yours. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Now I want to play the media reacting to, and remember, this is Steve Bannon, who they hate more than they hate anybody. I mean, they would rather Adolf Hitler were in the government than Steve Bannon. Remember how they just hated him? And now suddenly Bannon is talking about a meeting he wasn't at 2.5 months before he's in the campaign. Listen to this media reaction.
Welcome to a 5-alarm dumpster fire for the White House. Or shall we call it Bannon's Rebellion? The Russia investigation has been blown open in dramatic fashion.
What it really does is, as you put it, it really legitimizes from the Trump world that this Russia investigation is real.
So why would anybody question the legitimacy of the coverage of the Russia investigation when we have Steve Bannon talking, who, let's face it, is kind of a blowhard, right? He's a guy who talks in these very, very elaborate, very overdramatic terms, talking about a meeting he was not at in a campaign he wasn't involved in. I mean, this is just random commentary. It's like anybody could have said this, and it's Bannon, who they hate, and it's Bannon who just lost Alabama to the 5 Democrats in Alabama. I mean, it's Bannon who has made these incredible miscalculations, but suddenly, so they asked Sarah Sanders about this, the presidential spokeswoman, and she made what is, of course, a totally reasonable point, if this is obviously cut 5.
Did the president's son, Donald Trump Jr., commit treason?
I think that is a ridiculous accusation, and one that I'm pretty sure we've addressed many times from here before. And if that's in reference to comments made by Mr. Bannon, I'd refer you back to the ones that he made previously on 60 Minutes, where he called the collusion with Russia about this president a total farce. So I think I would look back at that. If anybody's been inconsistent, it's been him. Certainly hasn't been the president or this administration.
I mean, this is a perfectly reasonable point. I mean, prosecutors in trial always say, were you lying then or are you lying now? Well, here's Bannon. This is not the 60 Minutes one. This is an interview he gave with the New York Times. The 60 Minutes one that she references is also true. He did say that. But here's one from the New York Times, cut 2.
I think the collusion thing is, and I've said from day one, is a joke. I was there. We couldn't collude. We had a tough time colluding between the Trump campaign in Pennsylvania and the RNC.
So again, which is it? Is it a joke? Is it a farce? Or is it treason? I mean, if he says both things, don't we have to question? But the question is, why didn't Wolff ask? Why didn't Wolff, compare this? Say, yeah, he says this to me, but he said this here. Isn't that what you would do if you were? I mean, I write novels. I make up false stories for a living. Even I would say, oh, this doesn't make sense. This is not jibing with something, that happens on page 15 is what it's not jibing with something that happens on page 30. So the idea of this book, apparently, is that the Trump campaign was a campaign to lose, that they never expected to win. So here is a take out of this excerpt from New York Magazine. As the campaign came to an end, Trump himself was sanguine. His ultimate goal, after all, had never been to win. Now, you all know Donald Trump, and you know that he doesn't care about winning. So why? He just shrugs that stuff off. He doesn't care about winning at all. He says, "I can be the most famous man in the world," he had told his aide Sam Nunberg at the outset of the race. His longtime friend Roger Ailes, the former head of Fox News, liked to say that if you want a career in television, first run for president. Now, Trump, encouraged by Ailes, was floating rumors about a Trump network. That's true. He did do that. And he did probably think he was going to lose at some point, but that he was running to lose, very doubtful. It was a great future. He would come out of this campaign, Trump assured Ailes, with a far more powerful brand and untold opportunities. Now, a lot of this is coming from Bannon, who, by the way, had already given an interview to another guy named Josh Green, who wrote a book called Devil's Bargain, in which Bannon portrays himself as the far-seeing prophet who's the only one who knows that Trump is going to win. In that book, he says Bannon came to Trump, and Trump loved how Bannon, an avid reader of history, fitted Trump's campaign into the broader sweep of history. For years, Bannon had tracked and occasionally abetted the right-wing populist uprising sweeping across Europe and Great Britain, where others saw Trump's campaign as a joke or an ego trip. Bannon framed it as the inevitable U.S. manifestation of these same forces, and Trump as the avatar of an us versus them populism that would galvanize an electoral majority to rise up and smash the corrupt establishment. So in Bannon's old telling of this, and Bannon's telling of this in the book Devil's Bargain by Josh Green, Bannon very much thought they were going to win. And I think that as they approached, if you take a lot of the stuff in Wolff's excerpt if you put it back into context, what you're listening to is people who thought, well, look, if we don't win, we'll still have a network, we'll still be famous, kind of telling themselves it's not as bad as they think. But they were out there to win. There's just no question about it. Okay, so which one is right? Let's take this is the most telling part of the whole thing. Listen to this. The day after the election, this is from Wolff's excerpt, the bare-bones transition team that had been up during the campaign hurriedly shifted from Washington to Trump Tower. And now he's portraying them as absolutely shocked that they won and they didn't know. And Melania's crying because she'd been promised they were going to lose and all this stuff. The building, now the headquarters of a populist revolution, suddenly seemed like an alien spaceship on Fifth Avenue. But its otherworldly air helped obscure the fact that few in Trump's inner circle, with their overnight responsibility for assembling a government, had any relevant experience. This, by the way, is certainly true. It's certainly true that the opening of the Trump administration was chaotic, inexperienced, showed their inexperience. Ailes, a veteran of the Nixon, Reagan, and Bush 41 administrations, tried to impress on Trump the need to create a White House structure that could serve and protect him. You need an SOB as your chief of staff, he told Trump, and you need an SOB who knows Washington. You want to be your own SOB, but you don't know Washington. Ailes had a suggestion, John Boehner, who had stepped down as Speaker of the House only a year earlier. Who's that? Asked Trump. That's how dumb and ignorant, and this is a big theme, how ignorant Trump was. Well, the problem is, here's a picture. Do we have the image of Trump? Here's a picture taken in 2013 of Trump and John Boehner. So this is now 3 years before golfing. He's got a golf club in his hand. And here's another shot, a video of Trump answering questions about John Boehner 2 months before this story is supposed to have taken place.
Speaker Boehner's resignation today, some conservatives were actually happy about that. How do you feel?
Well, I think it's time. I mean, it's really time for him. He's a lot of problems. We got to get the country going, and I think it really is time.
So you think it's a good thing for the party?
I think right now it is. There's tremendous division in the party, and I think right now having him go is a good thing for the party, yes.
Trump didn't know who John Boehner. It's absurd. So you say, okay, that's a small detail, but you're writing a book about the President of the United States, right? And you're telling an anecdote. It's like the anecdote about how he removed the MLK bust from the Oval Office. There's a meaningful anecdote about how ignorant this guy is. And a novelist, me, Googled it and in 15 seconds realized the story wasn't true. Okay, so you have a nonfiction book coming out about the President of the United States saying the guy is so ignorant, so stupid, so clueless that he didn't even know who the last Speaker of the House is, which is absurd. Trump follows cable TV night and day. And you don't even check it? Really? Really? And you're going, and now we go on TV and say, oh, here's this new book, and it's so exciting. It's absurd. It is absurd. And let me go on to this other piece that he wrote, because he's Michael Wolff writes for the Hollywood Reporter. So he wrote a piece about how he got this. And by the way, let me know when we've got Nolte on. Oh, we've got him? Okay. All right. I want to let me rush through this because I don't want to keep John waiting, but I do want to say this first. That he says, first he says, this is how I got in. He says, after the election, I proposed to Trump that I come to the White House and report an inside story for later publication journalistically as a fly on the wall, which he seemed to misconstrue as a request for a job. And I said, no, I just like to watch and write a book. And he kind of shrugged this off. Since the new White House was often uncertain about what the president meant or did not mean in any given utterance, his non-disapproval became a kind of passport for me to hang around, checking in each week at the Hay Adams Hotel, making appointments with various senior staffers who put my name in the system, and then wandering across the street to the White House and plunking myself down day after day on a West Wing couch. I'm not even sure I believe this part, but let's say it's true. Let's say it's true. So now he says, this is his description of the President of the United States in his first days. Everybody was painfully aware of the increasing pace of his repetitions. It used to be inside of 30 minutes. He'd repeat word for word and expression for expression the same 3 stories. Now it was within 10 minutes. Within 10 minutes, he would repeat word for word and expression for expression the same 3 stories. Indeed, many of his tweets were the product of his repetitions. He just couldn't stop saying something. Now just stop for a minute, okay? You're Sherlock Holmes. How do you know that's not true? You know it's not true because you've seen Donald Trump speak for 45 minutes off the cuff. Just last October he did it on the White House lawn. You've seen him talk to reporters off the cuff for 45 minutes and address all their questions until they got tired of asking questions. Where does this guy? It's a fantasy. It's a fantasy. The other day he did a interview with the New York Times. They printed excerpts from the transcript. There was none of that. There was none of it. What does it come and go? And he suddenly, when he's outside in the real world, he doesn't do it. But when he's inside Michael Wolff's imagination, suddenly he starts to do it. This book is nonsense. And the guy has done a great job. Listen, I'm a writer. I would never take away from a writer to promote his book. Good for him. He's promoting his book. I'm sure it'll be a bestseller. But it's nonsense. I mean, the stuff that we have heard so far does not hold water. It doesn't pass the smell test. And so what we saw yesterday was Steve Bannon mouthing off, a guy who we already know has made incredible political miscalculations in Alabama. He's just made another one because the 3 things that Steve Bannon had were Trump. He had Breitbart, and he had the Mercer money. He's apparently lost the Mercer money, although Drudge says maybe he's got a new billionaire to fund him. Now he's lost Trump because Trump has taken him up to pieces.